Hello and welcome to my presentation for the Emergency Home Learning and More Summit. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see me. I'm Karen. Hello, it's very nice to be here with you. I'm Karen Locke-Culp. I am a child development expert and a parent coach. I have degrees in early childhood education and human development and family relations. And I feel like that second one, that latter one in human development and family relations, that's the one that really seems to be becoming more and more and more important as I do my work and as I help people, the folks that I work with, which includes you, hopefully, through this pandemic and through this incredibly crazy time, which is also a time of opportunity. And it is hard and it's frustrating. And as I do say, I like to look at things as things that are hard are also oftentimes there are some possibilities that open up that maybe we didn't see before. And I really I'm hopeful that I can be helpful for you today because one of the things that I have been doing during the pandemic and learning about during the pandemic is just the vital importance of open-ended play. If I ever thought that open-ended play, which is also called self-directed learning, it was important, that has come back to me 1,000 times in the pandemic. And I have some case studies I would like to share with you today. As I say, I'm an expert in child development, and I work with parents who are fundamentally changing the lives of their families and their children for good. And these are real people that I work with, that I have worked with, whose lives have been transformed by one simple thing, and that is play. Letting kids play. So I have, as I say, I've got 5 case studies I want to share with you, and I'm excited to jump in. Okay, so the first case study is a boy named Max, and actually he is now 20 years old, and he is my own son. When he was 7 years old, which is now 13 years ago, he was attending a school, and we like to say that he was allergic to school. He didn't succeed in school. In fact, he was very vibrant and curious and engaged going into it. And the school experience of his kindergarten, first grade, and into second grade years increasingly showed us how much of a non-fit this was. And I've got nothing against the school system. I've got nothing against the teachers. Everybody did the best that they could for him. But it was just the learning environment was toxic to him. And I have been given permission to talk about this. He really struggled, and that struggle took the form of, when he was 5, 6, 7 years old, of night terrors every night of the school year, particularly in first grade and starting up again in second grade, which we were not, he never woke up from them, but he would just be screaming bloody murder. We would wake up in the night, and my husband and I would be at his side before we knew that we were awake. And that, as I say, that happened most nights of the school year for years, or for a year and a half anyway. He was diagnosed with migraine when he was 6 years old. He lost 20% of his body weight in first grade alone. And what was most concerning to us was he really lost his personality. He stopped being our creative, inquisitive, fun kid, and just became this person who was just resigned to what they were doing. They say when someone is drowning that you don't, we might think that someone who's drowning would be like, hey, I'm over here, help, help, right? But they don't. What a drowning person does is just tries to process what's happening, and as a result, they don't look like they're drowning. And I think of that a lot, because that is exactly what our son Max went through. He was just in this, and he had no way of communicating to us except through his behavior and through his health, what was happening. And we pulled him out to homeschool when he was in the middle of second grade. We pulled him out at Thanksgiving time. And immediately things changed for the better. He stopped having night terrors. Like the last night terror that he had was the week before we pulled him out of school. The headaches went away, except when he got too much screen time, then we would see the headaches. But other than that, they pretty well stopped. And the biggest change that we made was we tried to be, I don't love the term, and I know it has other connotations now, but we tried to be unschoolers. We tried to be, that was how we thought of it as the time, was we were trying to do the opposite of what had been happening in school. So all of the learning, or at least a lot of it, came from within our son. So Max, along with his little brother, started to be interested in things. So I'm looking out on our backyard. We back onto a stream and a bunch of woods. And one of the first things that he did was he went into the woods with pencil and paper, and he started mapping what he named Dragon Woods. And he started telling stories about the things that went on in the woods, the dragons that lived there, and the creatures that, the caves and the holes and the places where the hills where events had happened in Dragon Woods, or things that were happening now. I mean, he would come home and he would tell us in just total fantasy, wonderful fantasy play about the goings on in Dragon Woods. And that was just one small part of him learning to thrive when the academic pressures of making him do things that he just wasn't prepared for, didn't want to do, that he wasn't drawn to, were removed. And so I didn't think of it this way at the time, but of course that was incredible self-directed learning. I mean, he's motivated to go out into the woods and draw maps and tell stories about the dragons that live there, right? What we noticed was he returned to us. So his personality came back, and he laughed again, and he would just become breathless laughing over Garfield cartoons, Garfield comics that he was reading to his little brother. As he got a little bit older and he got more confidence in reading aloud, he would read to us entire Dave Barry essays on things that just completely cracked us all up. And the learning came through the things that he was interested in. As I say, I didn't think of it at the time that it would be that's what self-directed learning, that what was happening was self-directed learning. But as I look back on it now, that's totally what it was. And the lesson here that I want to share regarding my son actually gets into something that didn't happen until 2 years after we started homeschooling, which is previous to that. So from the time that he was small, particularly in school, and then in the first couple of years of homeschooling, if Max's feelings were hurt, he reacted physically. Like, he would translate that to a physical pain. So if he was playing dodgeball and he got hit in the shoulder, he would drop to the floor, grab his knee, and scream that his knee was hurting him. His knee was hurting him. And it turns out it wasn't the knee that was hurting him. It was his feelings that had gotten hurt, because there's some social pressure to trying to do your best in a game and getting out, right? And I will never forget when he was 9 years old and he was finally, for the first time ever, able to say, "My feelings are hurt." And I feel like all along things had been going on a really good train, right? But when that happened, I thought, okay, now we're really getting somewhere. And I wanted to bring that up as the lesson here, because kids who learn in a self-directed way learn to regulate their emotions, and the cognitive stuff comes you have to have your emotions sorted out before you can get to the good cognitive learning. There needs to be a rhythm that works for you, and I think that's what self-directed learning did for our son. By the way, I called this, I thought this was impossible and we are doing it. That actually is a reference to a case study that will come up in a few minutes. But the second part of it is I want to help you understand how family life can be better when we are encouraging self-directed learning for our kids. And this is one major way that this happened. imagine not being able to verbalize your feelings of hurt and pain and happiness and frustration and joy. And when you are a self-directed learner, you know, as I've learned over my life, you become better able to do that, and that is a necessary part of making life better. Because when I feel like it should go without saying, but maybe it still needs to be said, that when we can use our words, can say my feelings are hurt, can say how you're feeling, we can make connections with people better, because now we're not lashing out in anger. Instead, we're saying, oh, I'm feeling my defenses go up here. We need to carry this conversation on at another time or something, right? And that's what self-directed learning brought to us in our family. So I really wanted to start with that. The second case study that I wanted to share was on, oh, and actually I wanted to bring up, I brought a book. This is one of my favorite books referencing our son's self-directed learning journey. It's called How Lincoln Learned to Read. It's by Daniel Wolfe. And I was able to interview Daniel Wolfe for one of the very early podcast episodes that I ever did. And Daniel, I feel like this whole book is about examples from American history of self-directed learning, and how the people learned, the subjects that he researches and shares about, writes about. It's about how did they learn what they needed to know. And it's such an important part of my thinking and learning on self-directed learning that I really wanted to remember to reference it. And in fact, as part of my as part of being a speaker in the Emergency Home Learning Summit, I was able to curate some public recordings, and one of those is my conversation with Daniel Wolfe. So I'm so grateful to Steve and to everybody who's planning this summit. I feel like this opportunity, this sort of virtual summit, gives us the chance to do things that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do in a non-virtual summit. And so one of them is to be able to put up talks like that. So so if you want to go deeper into my conversation with Daniel Wolfe about how kids learn to read, not just how kids learn to read, but how Lincoln learned to read. One of the things that I remember Daniel saying is, it doesn't do any good to raise kids to be prepared for like a job or an environment that doesn't exist. And so there's double motivations there, right? Like, we have a child who's happily learning now, but then what we also have is the best chance, I believe, for them to grow into what they will be happiest doing, how they will thrive, and how they can live a good life, how they can earn money, right? How they can live a good life. And I want to share just quickly before I move on, that my son is now 20, Max is now 20, and he has spent the last 13 years just steeped in his own sort of motivation, and he does things that are fun for him, and he does things with folks that he finds fun and loves to spend time with. There's so much learning that has gone on as a self-directed learner that we could never have foreseen. For example, he used to run screaming from math, and he is a math major in college, and he loves theoretical math. And his goal is to have a PhD in mathematics. And he's, as I say, he's a college student now, so who knows but that will change. But that's really where his mindset is. And I brought another book that has meant so much to me. So Ken Danford is one of the amazing people in this summit, and he wrote "Learning is Natural, School is Optional." And in this book, so both of my sons, Max attended a school, a learning center that was in the same model as Ken Danford's schools. So again, Ken's school is North Star. My sons, one of them still attends, and one Max attended until he moved on to college. it's called Bay State Learning Center. It is in Dedham, Massachusetts, and it is one of the liberated learners models of schools. And so when I read Ken's book this past winter, there's a part where they talk about the sort of dreaded math question. How will kids learn math? Like this was my obsession and my worry. And what I did about it was the wrong thing, which is basically I thought, well, I've at least taken a lot of the pressure off. So what I'll do is I will make Max learn math, and we got a curriculum. And the one thing that I felt like I could not give on was, oh, we have to work some math into your week. And the way that I framed it was like the superintendent is looking for at least something, and that got us to the couch for the learning. But he didn't love it. I think both of them look back on that time with frustration. And when I think about why, it's so interesting to me that one of the main reasons is because I was making them do it. It was not self-directed. So thankfully, when Max started going to North Star, when Max started going to Liberated Learners Model, BSLC, which is in the North Star, same model as North Star, we were able to say, there was a lot of support for us to say, you know what, let's back off on the math. He'll sort it out. And so for a couple of years, we didn't worry him about it. And he started to, as people said would happen, he started to think like, if I'm going to get anywhere, I actually probably do need to know some math. And at the same time, he was learning Euclidean geometry, which is like a description of the universe, which I think is the basis for I think he would say is the basis for his interest in theoretical mathematics. And from there, it was all him to say like, well, I really want this. Like, actually, math is an interesting language that I want to learn and know. And it didn't come from us making them sit down and do math curriculum. It came from his own innate desire to just, he was drawn, through his own curiosity on this self-directed learning journey, which has really been largely about educationally, intellectually about mathematics for him. So that's case study number one, my own kid. I'm glad that I could sort of share with you the end. I'm glad I could bring you a little further along the timeline. Like, here's one example of a kid who at 7, they were recommending that he see a therapist, that he start taking medicine because of his lack of focus. And when we withdrew him from school and started homeschooling, and all the way on through to now, where he is an incredibly motivated, incredibly focused kid on the things that really matter for him, that light him up. So that's case study number one. Number two is, as a parent coach, I work with parents whose home lives are terrifying to them and horrible to them. And I had the pleasure of working with a couple that I'm calling Cheryl and David. That's not their real names. And Cheryl and David had 2 small kids, two kids 3 and under. And I was invited to their home. Like, basically what we set up was an observation where I would go and observe what was happening in their home. So I arrived just after they got home one night. So they were both getting home from work. Kids were just getting home from childcare. There's a 3-year-old and about an 18-month-old. And it was bedlam. I walked in to absolute mayhem, and they basically said, this is what it's like every night. And so, I mean, mealtime was like a microwaving of a couple of chicken nuggets, and the kids were told, like, okay, if you have enough bites of the chicken nuggets, then you will be able to have dessert. And in the meantime, no one was, both adults, both Cheryl and David were just standing in the midst of chaos. So a beautiful home with lots of toys, lots of distractions, and the children just ran through the home, sort of tearing things down. The older one would often knock over the younger one, or just push past them. And I just couldn't believe, it was like a maelstrom that went on. There wasn't really a sort of dinner hour. Instead, there was, I'm going to try and hand you a chicken nugget as you run by. They did have, in all of that evening, where I was there from about 5 o'clock until about 9, when the kids were finally settled. We then talked after the kids were finally settled, but the kids got settled at about 9. it was like 4 hours with maybe 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes of we are all at the table together, like having a meaningful connection. And that was it. And even while that was happening, there was playthings on the table, blocking people being able to see each other or talk to each other. There was a lot more focus on like the negotiation of how much you're going to eat so that you get your dessert bribe. And I am not saying, I really hope that that this comes across. I'm not saying this to be critical of these parents. They loved their children so incredibly much. They tried to give them everything. They live in this gorgeous house. They've got all these toys. And they were both stars in their industries. So one was a project manager, one is in finance. And they had all the best intentions and no idea how to rein in anybody's behavior, how to make anything change for the good. And I remember being very shell-shocked. I remember writing down a lot of the language that the little boy, I'm calling him Riley, would try to. He was trying so hard to sort of communicate with words, and he would try to say things, and I would catch these little snippets. And he would try to engage anyone, and no one could hear him because of the bedlam, right? And so eventually he would give up and start to scream and contribute to the bedlam. And the older child that I'm calling Athena was just like, she had given up on the language aspect. She wasn't heard, and so she would just try to sort of bash her way through and insist on being seen. And so she would start to do negative things, like for attention. So she would knock over her little brother. She would throw food off the table. She would just grunt or growl or throw things, anything to sort of get attention. And as I say, it was chaos. And I recommended to them that that what I wanted them to start with was 10 minutes per day of open-ended, screen-free family time, where we sort of, the screens are go, because the screens were a huge part of this, which I didn't get into, and I feel like I kind of don't have time to really talk about all of that. But to put the screens away, all of the screens are off. We are together doing not a focused activity that has like a sort of predictable outcome, but instead we are observing the kids to see what they are interested in, what they want to do. Maybe we're walking around outside and just being out in the world. Maybe we're setting out some Play-Doh and we're playing with it, and we're also talking. Maybe it's just something, maybe it's the kind of play that is a little bit more physical and fun, but that is led by the children. So so that was what I basically said, okay, here's your homework for this week before we meet again. I want you to spend 10 minutes of screen-free, just together time doing whatever the kids want to do. And I came back in a week to observe, and we timed it so that I was arriving just as Cheryl was arriving home. And so David had the kids outside, and it had just rained. And I vividly remember the little Riley, observing him saying, his face lit up. He sees Mom's car pull in the driveway, and he says, "I show Mama puddles." And he sort of, clocks his little legs right down the path and the walkway, and he's there when his mom opens her door, and she gives him a huge big hug, and he says, "Mama, puddles." And she says, "Oh, are you seeing lots of puddles? Show me." And so, and like the dynamic, all four of them are now outside enjoying each other's company, throwing a ball, playing, communicating together. And that was just the beginning. From there, they discovered, even before that week was out, this is working. So so they really made time to spend time together as a family. As they were learning how to do this, they were able to focus a little bit more on, like, okay, if you're with the kids in this time, I will be heating up our dinner. It started to work for things like the bedtime routine and the bath time routine, things that they had never conceived of being pleasant, fun times got a lot more fun with the introduction of open-ended play. Now, that's not to say that there were not other issues and other concerns that had to be addressed. There's a part of this that has to do with applying boundaries and staying firm to some boundary. But I feel like that's a conversation for another time. I went home that first night, not even sure why I had suggested that their homework be 10 minutes of together family time. And it was only later that I realized they were missing each other completely all the time. Like there was no connection, there was no communication, and I wanted to bring that into their lives. And so the lesson here is that connection and communication are truly the lifeblood of family life. The best way to get that is open-ended, independent play. And sometimes this is going to be us sitting back and saying, okay, I'm going to be doing my independent play. I'm going to be reading this magazine, or I'm going to be doing my independent play here, and I'm going to watch you enjoying that. And you can talk to me, and you can tell me what you're doing, but you don't have to. You can just enjoy it, right? So again, it's a really practical application, and it starts with just 10 minutes a day of independent play, open-ended play that is family together time, and just seeing what branches out from that. So I hope that makes sense. I was so excited to see that with this family, and it just confirmed for me. This was before the pandemic. This was actually a couple years ago, and so I know things look a little bit different now, but it doesn't make the family-centered play any less important. In fact, I think you could argue that it's maybe more important now. The third case study that I want to share has to do with a coaching client of mine. Her name is Nora, and she has a little boy who's now 4. We've been working together for several years. And in the pandemic, she's got a very, very, very demanding job. She loves her job. Her job requires real focused attention for 8 or more, oftentimes many more hours a day. It involves impromptu meetings. It involves phone calls that have to be answered and responded to professionally, and like work that needs to get done on that to actually get done, right? And when you combine that with a small apartment, she's a single parent, so there's no one else to look after her 4-year-old while she is simultaneously working and looking after him. And just all the stresses of the pandemic, which made it really, really difficult. But one of the most difficult things for her to wrap her mind around was the idea that that I should be teaching. She kept thinking, I ought to be teaching him letters and numbers. I ought to be teaching him stuff. If he's going to be stuck home with me, I should be his teacher at 4 years old, as well as his parent. And she took a real leap of faith very early on in the pandemic, when in our work together, when she basically, we decided that what she would do is not worry so much about the academics, that instead we would focus on getting him enjoyable routines, things that he could feel comfortable doing. And at the beginning, a lot of that was screen time. I mean, he was having like 3, 4, 5 hours of screen time while mom was working. And that worked at first. She was okay about it at first, when it was like, we're on an adventure, and part of our adventure is you get to watch these carefully selected channels. For example, what we talked a lot about, and I talk a lot about this in all of my work, is with young children, there is never a time when they should be watching YouTube on their own, because we never know what's going to come next in the autoplay, for example. YouTube is not a place that can be trusted, just because of the nature of it. It's the Wild West. There are other Wild West sites. TikTok is one of them. And I'm not saying that kids shouldn't see these. What I'm saying is that we need to be watching right along with them if they're young. And as they get to be a little older, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. Now, what I think what it's great, the self-directed learning can take the path of, okay, well, if you're going to branch out and see these things on your own without me, like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about media literacy. Let's talk about what it means to understand your source and to know what is this person trying to, what might they be trying to get you to buy? What might you see that influences you in a way that doesn't feel good? I mean, so anyway, that's again, a story for another time. But with this mom, our work was at first, it was like, all right, we're setting up these routines where she can at least get her work done. He is watching things that are safe for him to watch. It's not ideal, but it's doing it. So this was sort of the beginning crisis parenting, right? And then as we got into May, June, she started to become more and more frustrated because she felt like now what we have is a kid who's just totally addicted to screen time, and I can't have that. Like, something needs to give, and I don't know what it is. And what it was introducing, again with some boundaries, but introducing self-directed play into her son's life. He's an energetic 4-year-old, and she had thought that stopping the screen time was going to be impossible. And she basically said, I feel so hopeless. I just don't know how I'm going to make it so that he can't, he doesn't destroy our home, and I can get my work done. And what they came up with was a series of what she called mommy breaks. And by the way, this happened in like a 24-hour period. She went from, this is impossible, there's no way I'm going to be able to figure this out, to a day later, she was saying, I thought this was impossible, and we are doing it. She transformed their home life in one day. And it was really the open-ended play, the independent play that did it. So they used a timer. And at first she set the timer for like 10 minutes, and she would say, okay, you're going to play on your own for 10 minutes. I'm going to do my work in the other room with the door closed. The door had to be closed. Otherwise he would be distracted. He would come in. So she had to close the door for this, all of this time. And she would say, after 10 minutes, when the timer goes off, I'm going to come out and we are going to have a 5-minute mommy break. And he loved that. And so, so during the 5-minute mommy break, they could do whatever he wanted to do together within reasons, during the pandemic. So, and they couldn't leave home because it was still her work day. So, but they would play with, they've got some special sand that you could play inside. I think it's called kinetic sand, or Play-Doh, or trains, or Lego, or all of the things that he was interested in were physical, engineering kind of minded, like playful things that you could just build with, or create, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. But they were not reading, writing. They were not, they loved to snuggle together and read stories, but they were not, that wasn't the thrust of his independent play. It was always about the world building, like the cool and exciting and fun stuff that he wanted to build. He wanted her to be a part of that when she was on her mommy breaks. And they worked it up to the point where they now have, this is still how they live. They're not in lockdown, so their weekends look a little bit different. But during this workday, they're at home, and she generally works for 30 to 35 minutes. The timer goes off. They have a mommy break together. And then of course there's lunch, and there's, their day is structured in a way that works really well for both of them. It's a flexible structure so that it can change, but in general, they've created a beautiful routine that works for both of them. And this is really important because she had felt that she was feeling like, I'm not doing my child a good service by not teaching him reading, writing, stuff like that. And also, I'm not doing my child a good service by just letting it be screen time all day. And she was feeling incredibly hopeless about that. And within one day, she sort of went from like, oh, this isn't working, to now I can see how to do it. And that boy at 4 years old is reading. He is literate now. And I say that not as a feather in anybody's cap, but here is this mom who is so incredibly worried about her son's, that she wasn't teaching her son what he needed to know. And through self-directed learning, through letting him independently play, through their playfulness together being, child driven, without a true outcome. There was no like, well, today you're going to build this block creation and that's your homework or that's your work, right? It was purely what the child wanted. Not only did they cut down on things like temper tantrums, and not only did they build a wonderful life together that they are still living, but he learned to read. Like this thing that she had been so frightened of and that she felt like, I'm going to have to teach him, he learned on his own. And he's thriving, and he loves to read with her, because it's what works for him. So the lesson here is, I actually think of this as loose parts. So another one of the talks that I am so thrilled I get to have as part of my curated talks for this Emergency Home Learning Summit is one that I did in a nursery school playground with the nursery school owner. Her name's Tanya Trainer. She's got several in Westboro, Massachusetts. She's got 3 nursery schools. They're all called Miss Tanya's Nursery School. And several years back, they discovered that taking out all of their outdoor play equipment and not using, the regulations changed for like how many kids could be around the space that you needed around a set of swings or a slide or something like that changed. And so they thought, well, what else can we do? And what they decided to do was to adopt a philosophy called loose parts. So they brought in a bunch of things that like stones, wooden blocks, pipes, and like PVC tubing and joints, and they had a water, they had like a spigot where kids could put water, could run water down creations, a gigantic rowboat that sat, on the ground, and the kids at first they used it for fantasy play, but what they really ended up using it for was to play with their balance. Absolutely fascinating. And they just basically put a whole bunch of interesting playthings, a lot of like, so there were quite a few wooden blocks, there were quite a few balls and ramps in there, and to sort of let the children into this play area and see what happened. And what they noticed happened is you didn't have kids waiting in line for the slide anymore, and frustrated with each other because only one person can be on the slide at a time. Instead, you had kids cooperatively playing together. Little kids, kids who in theory are still in what we would call the parallel play stage of development, which is like sort of 2, 3, 4 years old. They tend to play next to each other rather than together. Even kids of those age are cooperatively playing, and kids of all ages are cooperatively playing together. They say that the loose parts philosophy was the most important change that they could possibly have made. They've got happier children, they've got more engaged children, they've got kids who are thriving. And what could be more self-directed than a bunch of interesting, safe things to play with? You know what I mean? And it's all monitored, so it's not like the kids are sort of left alone. The teachers are engaged in playing with them because that's kind of how it is. And so I think of this as the lesson here is bringing a loose parts philosophy into our independent play, our child independent play, can be really helpful. So in Nora's case, what they have is Lego blocks and train sets, or a train set, and things with a lot of loose and interchangeable parts, which is exactly what they had on Miss Tanya's play, outdoor play. And they've incorporated this into their indoor play areas as well. But that, part of that I was learning about and talking about with Miss Tanya was on the playground. And what was very fun is partway through our conversation, the children come out and I can see them playing. It's such a blast. And I'm so glad I get to bring that to you. Again, thank you so much, Steve, and everybody for making this possible. So exciting to me. When we sort of adopt a loose parts philosophy in terms of our young child's self-directed play, when we give them the opportunities to play with things like Tupperware, things we already have at home, it's very practical because we don't have to go out and buy new things. It can be what we've already got. It can be recyclables, right? Cardboard or paper tubes, or it can be magic markers. It can be paint. It can be books. It can be whatever they're interested in, I think of as part of the loose parts philosophy. And when we do that, the lesson here is that it's not just possible, it's wonderful. It's good fun to structure a child's environment to support their open-ended play. It supports good feelings, it supports family togetherness. And I actually wanted to end this particular case study with the following. So Nora wrote, we've got a series of forums that are on my website, and Nora wrote into these forums recently. She was writing about their plan for the coming months. So I believe she wrote this back in August. So they get to spend the rest of 2020 not worrying about childcare. They're basically, between her and her partner, her parenting partner, her ex-husband, they have figured out how to keep this routine going in a way that works for everybody, that feels good for everyone. And Nora writes, "It's such a relief to have a plan. I'm still sad for my 4-year-old that he can't play with other kids, but also so relieved that we can keep the classroom pressure off him and just let him play for at least these coming months. If he goes back in January, which is dependent on a lot of, pandemic kind of issues, he will have been home for a total of 10 months. And I really want to highlight what she says next. What a gift and a privilege. Our relationship has been challenged and strengthened, as has my co-parenting relationship." And she is saying that about open-ended play, right? About bringing her, reshaping their environment, their apartment environment, to have a lot of wonderful open-ended play and to build a routine that works for both of them like this. And they're thriving. And it's been such a thrill to be able to see that happening and to play some small part in that happening. Of course, she did it, but I'm thrilled that I've gotten to be along for this ride and to help her figure out how to do it. And in fact, this is the case study that I built my talk around. When Steve first wrote and said, "What knowledge do you have to share that can help people right now in our emergency home learning situation?" This was the first one that I thought of. And her idea is that, I thought this was impossible, and we are doing it. And I know that you can do it too. And I really hope that this is a practical enough talk to help you feel, that you're encouraged to do that. The next one that I want to talk about is again, this is a woman that I work closely with. She is named Jen. And she's got 2 daughters, and her older daughter has always loved school, always really engaged with the teachers, and really felt like she loved the learning. I mean, she's regular school has very much worked for her. And they are in a virtual learning situation right now. And Jen is struggling because her daughter, who is now in 3rd grade, is in a Zoom classroom or a Google class. I don't remember exactly the technology, but she's in a virtual classroom with like 40 other kids, and the teacher has an additional 40 other kids besides these 40 kids who are Zoom learning, or who are, I'm just going to call it Zoom learning because that's the tech that works. That's the name that works for me. I hope that works for you. So she is completely lost. She feels utterly lost in this classroom, this virtual classroom, where she's supposed to be spending like the bulk of her day. This is one of those, the way that the learning is set up, the virtual learning is set up in their school system is 3rd graders are getting, they see over the course of a week, they spend time with, I think it's 4 different teachers, but they spend the most time with their ELA teacher, their English language arts teacher. And so this girl is not getting called on. She is not getting seen. She is not getting heard. She is not feeling cared for at all. Her mom reports, Jen reports, that at the beginning of their day, they talk to a quote, a bot, a social emotional learning bot. And what the children are asked to do is just say how they're feeling. And this mom is so incredibly sad and frustrated because what her daughter has been reporting, what the mom has been overhearing, is her daughter every day telling this bot about how sad and frustrated and mad she is, because she is not seen in her class, in her virtual class learning. And I wanted to bring this one in here because through our work together, she has really been able to figure out how to help her daughter with this. Like, going to school is not an option, right? In fact, the best option for them, and this is really where I wanted to bring it up for our purposes, is because she felt comfortable saying to her daughter, all right, you don't have to attend these classes. You know, it's clear that you're able to do the assignments. It's clear that you even like the assignments, but you don't have to go to the classes if you don't want to go. And I think this went against the grain for both of them. Her daughter was like, really? And she, Jen, was, you know, I think in a different world would have been concerned about that, because you know, you're supposed to be going to these classes. But she's like, here I am encouraging my third grader to skip school. And that's what's really helped. This is not an ideal situation for a lot of reasons, but I think mostly what I wanted to communicate here is, if you have a child in Zoom school and they are telling, you know, the bot, the social emotional language bot, how sad and mad and frustrated they are, you do have options. And one of them is, if you cannot homeschool, or if you cannot separate from the school department, whether because maybe you are also working full-time and trying to make this work, you do have the option of saying, this is not working for us. Now, this is after they did try to work with the school and the teacher, and what they got back was a very terse, you know, be patient, it's September. And boy, was that frustrating. So, and as a result of being able to say, like, listen, you do not have to go to this class. You can play, you can do what you want while this class is happening. That's where the self-directed learning comes in. The daughter is trusting her mom to be there for her and to help her solve her problems. And what's been happening is they're able to talk a lot about how hard it is when your feelings get hurt, and how hard it is when you're trying to do the right thing and your teacher isn't seeing that, right? I actually came up with 3 lessons for this one. So the first one is, if our child isn't getting something that they need from a teacher, we can help. That's number 1. So maybe your situation doesn't look exactly like this, but you can still help. There is a way. We just don't know what it is yet, right? And trying something is better than not, I think, is probably what I would. Getting some self-directed learning into their lives is better than not getting any self-directed learning into their lives. The second thing is that nothing is perfect, right? And everything can be tinkered with until it's workable. So I really wanted to make sure that I got that message in there. There's a lot of self-forgiveness and a lot of, because I think we can feel a lot of guilt. So I would want to encourage you to say to yourself, you know what, this is today, we can try again tomorrow. It's going to be okay. And because nothing is perfect, and what we're doing is we're trying to work towards a more perfect setting. And then the other reason I wanted to bring this up is because Jen was getting some pushback from her mom. Her mom basically wanted Jen to pull her daughter out of this and start get a different teacher, like right away. Oh, this isn't working, we're going to get you a different teacher. And Jen provides a really great example of how to resist others' judgment. So in my case, when I think about my son Max, I really felt that judgment of, oh boy, you know, you have a master's degree, you're really invested in the school system. It's not the school system that's the problem, it's your child that's the problem. And it wasn't until I could wrap my mind around the idea that the school system simply wasn't working for my child, and I needed to set aside my allegiance to the system in order to take care of my child, right? So in this way, I did feel like I had to overcome some judgment. I got emails from people who were basically saying, like, I utterly disagree with this, and I think you're doing your child a disservice. And I had to say, you know what, it's not your choice. Thank you for the information, but it's my choice. And in this way, Jen has also had to do that. And so she wrote the following, and I really wanted to share this with you if you're having this experience of frustrating judgment as you're trying to work some self-directed learning into your life and into your child's life. She writes, my mom's opinion is making me question myself a bit, but I'm going to try it my way for a while and see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I'll try it her way. She thinks I ought to start seeking a teacher change without delay. Maybe it will get to the point where I seek a teacher change, and that won't be the first time that my mom was right all along, haha. So Jen talks a little bit about how there's this thing that she thinks of as grandma magic, where her daughter, like grandma can work some sort of magic that Jen feels that she doesn't have. And so that's why she's sort of feeling this judgment and this pull, like why aren't you just doing this thing that I'm telling you to do with your daughter? So she says, I told my mother that I was feeling my defenses go up and I asked to drop the subject. We did, and talked about other things for a bit. Later, my mother acknowledged that grandma is a totally different role than mom, and it's reasonable that stuff works for her, grandma, that may not work for me regularly. Same kid, different results because it's grandma. So I'm not fretting about my mom's opinions about all this. And I wanted to share that because, again, it may not, it's a little bit messy, I feel like, when we try to change things up. It can maybe even a lot messy. And we might get pushback from people, but to be able to say, I'm feeling my defenses go up, I want to put this on the back burner and have this conversation maybe later. I was always taught, and this really worked for me, to say thank you for the information and then just not act on that information. It's your child, you're free to do exactly what you want to do, right? But that's a practical thing that I think might be something that comes up in your world, and that's why I wanted to bring it into this virtual summit. So the last case study that I want to share is about me. So I think I came to self-directed learning late in life. I wasn't a self-directed learner until two things happened, I feel like. One was we pulled Max out of school and started homeschooling. So that was 13 years ago. The other was when he was 11, so 9 years ago now, a little more than 9 years ago, I became ill. And I developed, from my illness, which was, I got diverticulitis, which I would not wish on my worst enemy. And I needed to undergo a couple of, serious rounds of antibiotics that did take the infection away. But they, and we didn't know this, what I'm sharing now, we did not know this at the time, because it was 9 years ago, but in the intervening years, we've discovered that the antibiotic that I took has an ingredient in it that causes tendon ruptures, causes tendon problems. And so I got better from the diverticulitis. And about a month after I got it, about a month after I got it, I started having a huge problem with my tendons, the tendons in my legs, specifically one set of tendons. And that was the beginning of a journey where we now call this, it's my tendon disorder. The rheumatologist calls it recurrent diffuse tendinopathy. And I mean, a team of doctors basically and health professionals have helped me get better from this, but I'm not 100% better. And I feel like I wish there was some easy way to describe this tendon disorder so that it didn't feel like I had to sort of spend 5 minutes talking about it. But basically, as a result of it, I needed a wheelchair when I left the house in 2011 and into 2012. I did finally, I was able to regain my ability not just to walk, but to thrive in terms of my legs. I'm a skier again. That was a thrill. I'll never forget the first time I was able to stand on both legs with my not holding on to anything. That happened in a physical therapy session, and like in physical therapy, everybody broke out into applause because it was a big, big deal. It was an 18-month rehab for my legs from this tendon disorder. And then, because we didn't know that it was a thing that affected all of my tendons, I blew out my thumb tendons. And when you lose your thumb tendons, you lose your hands, you lose your wrists, you lose your elbows, you lose the ability to use your arms. I had 5% use of my hands at one point, and that was a very long point. It was about, I think that was probably about 8-10 months, something like that, where I couldn't like twirl spaghetti or pour coffee or use my hands in any reasonable way. There was no fine motor for me. There still isn't, actually. For fine motor, I use my voice. So everything I do, for example, on the computer is by voice. And that happened. I lost my thumbs well, I didn't lose them. They're here. Like, I'm physically okay, but I lost the ability to use them in 2013. And that meant I could not be the at-home parent in any capacity for like doing laundry or cleaning or cooking, or I couldn't do any of the things that I loved to do, like knitting, or actually love to cook. I really, really struggled. Unfortunately, the kids were well along on their homeschooling / kind of unschooling, self-directed learning journey, that that they were actually great. I mean, they were incredibly helpful and supportive. I can look back now and say that there were a lot of good bonds created during that time, because not only did I need them, but they still needed me. Even if I didn't have my hands, they needed my brain. They needed my thoughts. They needed my good heart, right? They needed me. And that was the beginning of, that was like I guess the biggest step on my own self-directed learning journey. And it came about because a friend of mine said, now there was no podcast, there was no website, there was no work with parents, there was no parent coaching, right? I hadn't been a preschool teacher for a long, long time, which is what I had been before I was a stay-at-home mom. And then with the homeschooling, that I wasn't able to go back to that already. Well, the tendon disorder made it impossible for me to work in any capacity, I thought. And in my depths of despair, when I really felt useless and in pain, but I was coming out of the pain, I guess, a friend of mine said, okay, the things that you used to do are off the table for you. You're not cooking, you're not cleaning, you're not using your hands for anything practical. So what opportunity does this open up for you? What can you do? You got a lot of time on your hands. What can you do? And that was the point at which I decided to ask that question of myself, and I remember thinking like, well, I'll go back and get a degree in, I don't remember, I'll go back and get a degree in therapy. I'll get a degree in engineering. I'll get a degree in something else that wasn't. And I remember my dad saying to me, what if you sort of look to the degree that you've already got? You've got a great degree. Like, what could you do with that? And that is where all of the work that I do online, or with helping people online or offline, I suppose, came about, because I asked myself the question, all right, these things are off the table. What can you do? And as a self-directed learner, I'll tell you, I was incredibly motivated to, for example, to start a podcast, because I was like, I could talk, like I can use my voice. It's only my hands that don't work. And so I was able to engage my heart, my mind, and my voice to start on this journey. And I would never wish the pain and the awfulness of the tendon disorder, which I do still live with. I have on a good day, I have probably 60% use of my hands, but that's on really good days. And I mean, it's still an issue in my whole body. And that's okay. Basically what I'm saying is I have learned to, even while I am still dealing with the tendon disorder itself, and while I am still living this, life that isn't the life that I lived before, I do still need to think hard about my choices for where I put my energy, because if I do too much, I'm going to irritate tendons. My tendons create scar tissue. That is really the nature of this. Sorry, I didn't didn't mention that before, but basically my tendons create scar tissue very, very quickly, and then that needs to be broken up and dealt with, and it's incredibly painful and frustrating. And so for the most part, I don't get to that point anymore, but it still happens sometimes. And I would not trade all of that awfulness, because what it did was it brought me to this point where self-directed learning is not just a force for good in my life, but in my family's life, in my kids' life. And I really feel like it wouldn't have happened. I know it wouldn't have happened without getting the tendon disorder in the first place. And so the lesson that I want to take from this particular case study is that even adults must be self-directed learners to thrive. I really, really believe that. We have to have things that motivate us, and that make it so that the things that when we're not in flow, right, it's okay, because we're doing the things that are going to get us to flow, because we can't spend all of our time in flow. And I think self-directed learning means, if you're a parent of a young child especially, it can feel incredibly guilt-inducing to say, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to take this class on something that I'm interested in just because I'm interested in it. And we can feel like we're sort of denying our child time with us. We're denying our child, we're not overseeing their education in this moment. We're doing something that's just for us. And I think that is one of the most crucial and important lessons that we can give kids, that we model doing things that interest us. We model self-directed learning. And so there's a really virtuous cycle there, where we are showing our kids in our own lives, this is what it looks like to thrive. And we do that by taking care of ourselves, and by giving ourselves permission to have that self-directed learning time, and giving ourselves permission to kind of relax on their, making sure that they get whatever it feels like is a proper education to us. And I know how hard that is. I mean, I told you before about how for their early years, I made sure that they had math, and I regret that, but that's what I did. And that's where and like we talk about that sometimes, how like they'll be like, do you remember when, you used to sit down and make us do this? And I say, I absolutely do remember that, and I profoundly regret it. But it's what happened, and I'm glad that we can still be together and be enjoying each other's company. And I apologize for doing that, and I've now seen the error of my ways, right? So adults need to be self-directed learners to thrive. And I want to leave you with this, finally, what I think of as the ultimate lesson, which is that self-directed learning is not pretty all the time, right? It's messy, it's trial and error, it's a leap of faith. It can feel so incredibly scary. But it's a mindset shift, that where we're not coming from a place of fear. Fear would be if my coaching client Nora had said, you know what, kid, we're going to sit down every night and you're going to do these worksheets, because that's how you're going to learn to read or write. But it is instead the letting go and saying, all right, this feels really crazy here, but I'm going to let him make the choice about how he spends his learning time, which as in a 4-year-old's life, that is the blocks. It's the things that he chooses to kind of play with, right? It's the goofy Zoom play dates with his cousins. It's those kinds of things. The ultimate lesson is that self-direct learning is a mindset shift, and it is so worth it. And that's my experience, and I really hope that if you try it, that you also have that experience. And I just want to say, finally, just thank you so much for watching. I set out to make this a 30-minute talk, and I fear that we've probably gone quite a bit beyond that. But I'm really glad that you stayed with me, and that that you've brought me into your home and your life, and that I get to share these ideas with you. And I really hope that they're meaningful for you. That that something that I've said will help you on your journey towards raising a self-directed kiddo. And I want to say thank you so much to Steve and to everybody who has made this conference possible. I was so thrilled to be invited, and just really glad to kind of be here, and you know, I feel like I'm having you along my unschooling journey or self-directed journey, just as I'm hopefully being a part of yours, and that really, really means a lot to me. So it feels good to me that we can sort of proverbially hold hands and take that leap together. All right, thank you so much. I am Karen Locke-Culp. My website is WeTurnedOutOK.com, and I would love to connect with you either through there or through my podcast, which is the We Turned Out Okay podcast. It is available in, like, you know, wherever you find your podcasts, and I hope to connect with you in the future. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching.